I'm hiding in the nursery because my wife and son are both sick. It's kind of like The Walking Dead around here, and I'm the only one who's not a zombie. Hey everybody, it's week 3 here in CIT 12. Normal week this week. Hopefully you got everything taken care of last week with chapter 1, the quiz, the discussion, all that sort of stuff. Now going into week 3, it's going to have kind of the same pace. Week 3, we're covering chapter 2. Now chapter 2 is all about computer hardware. They talk about input hardware, output hardware, as well as all sorts of other sorts of hardware. It's the physical computer itself. All right. Now the physical computer itself has changed a lot. And in fact, my lecture video this week, which you can check out, is all about sort of input and output hardware, because that's where the real change has happened. Processors have gotten faster, yada yada, but the way we interact with machines, that's what's really changed in the last 10 years or so. So anyway, read chapter 2, take a look at the lecture video, and in fact, I added a supplemental video this week all about IBM Watson. I mentioned it in my lecture video, but it's a really interesting idea, a computer that can just understand language and actually just read normal language and be able to handle that. Here's the thing that I think is really interesting. I was in a meeting just a few weeks ago, right here at the beginning of the semester, and they were talking about the state of California. You probably remember when you sort of enrolled here at Fresno City College, you had to take an exam that placed you in a particular English class, right? It was an English placement exam, determined whether or not you could take 1A immediately, or if they thought you needed to go and take a lower level course and work your way up to 1A. Here's the thing. In the new system, they're actually using the IBM Watson system to grade your essays for that exam. So that colleges all throughout California will be given a grade, and then they can decide if they want to, have a human look at all of the essays, or if they just want a human to kind of look at ones that are on the borderline. Some colleges may even just choose to use the IBM Watson scoring period. So the idea that high school seniors will be writing essays that will be graded by a computer, I just think is utterly fascinating. It tied in with this week, but like I said, IBM Watson, it's actually going to affect, well, maybe not your life because you're already in college, but people who are, sophomores and juniors who will eventually be taking those placement exams, it may affect their life. Anyway, read chapter 2, take a look at the lecture video, and there's a quiz on chapter 2, so make sure you go in there and take the quiz. All right, your discussion this week is about Oculus Rift. Now, Oculus Rift is another way of interacting with digital data, right? If you haven't heard about it, it's essentially a virtual reality headset. It takes 2 very large screens, right? And it places those large screens in front of your eyes, and it tracks the motion of your head, right? It checks the motion of your head, the slight breathing sort of up and down of your body, everything. And it corresponds that with what you're seeing. Now, because you're seeing 2 different images, they can sort of offset those images and you will see in 3D. It is, from what I understand, the best 3D experience we've ever been able to create, and there's lots of people talking about it. I mean, even Time magazine, right, like a paper magazine, just did an article all about virtual reality and about Oculus Rift in particular. So I have several resources. Learn about Oculus Rift. It's something that I'm sure if you haven't already heard about it, you will be hearing about it. It's set to come out in early 2016. We don't know the exact date. We also don't know the exact price. But regardless, it'll come out in early 2016. And this is something that could potentially change the way we live, right? It could be an entirely different form of entertainment. It could be something that makes video games incredibly realistic. There could be sort of specialized movies. I don't want to necessarily say that Hollywood will sort of adopt this, although they certainly could. But for certain things where it's like, I want you to be able to experience Paris. And so to be able to walk through that in a 3D way might be really interesting. But more importantly, they're beginning to find non-entertainment uses for this virtual reality headset. Pretty much anything that's dependent upon visualization is something that could be affected by this technology. We may not have talked about it, but the idea that there are people right now in Fresno doing surgeries using laparoscopic machines that are here in Fresno, but the actual patient is somewhere in Virginia or something, right? The idea of remotely doing surgeries, anything that can help you to visualize that process better is something that would be good for everybody, doctors and patients alike. So anyway, Oculus Rift, cool new technology. A lot of people are talking about it, so I figured, hey, let's make our discussion about it. That way, if you haven't heard about it, you won't seem like the one person who doesn't know about it when you go to dinner parties. All right? So, Oculus Rift, that's the discussion for this week. And by the way, make a prediction. We had virtual reality in the 1980s. I mean, it was terrible, but we had virtual reality in the 1980s, and it just faded away. This may do the same thing. You tell me. What do you think is going to happen with this Oculus technology? And then your lab this week is Word. This is our first week in Word. Word is the program that most students are already familiar with. You've probably had to use it for classes already. Word does a ton of stuff for you, including keeping track of resources, allowing you to be able to cite sources very easily. Word does a lot of things that a lot of people don't really pay attention to. And in fact, something that you may not even think about, because if you're only using Word to write papers, and you really haven't had the experience of using Word in a work environment, Word has a lot of features for sort of teams working together, where you can make comments, you can sort of post revisions, you can see what's changed in a document that's sort of being collaboratively written over time. Lots of those sorts of features. Now, week one, we're not going to get into those. Week one, you're going to learn how to boldface and do stuff like that. But needless to say, we will eventually get there, and you'll see some of those advanced features of Word. It's actually a fairly good product. We will talk about an alternative here in a future week, but for right now, Word is our lab, so make sure you get in there and get a score in for the Word lab. Not very many questions this week, which I guess is probably a good thing. I will say, if you are using my IT lab and you have a Mac at home, if I have not mentioned this already, if you run into problems, be sure to send me an email and we can talk about stuff. There are actually some questions that you will just not be able to do on a Mac. Not your fault. The program is supposed to work for both. And in fact, I think there is kind of a convoluted workaround for it, but I don't want you to have to learn a convoluted workaround. So I'll tell you what to do if you have a Mac for those specific questions when you run into a problem. All right. That being said, that's our week. So read Chapter 2, take a look at the lecture video, be sure to get a score in for your quiz for Chapter 2, and then do the discussion. Make sure you respond to another student to continue the conversation. There are points for the response. And then finally, be sure to do your lab in Word. The first lab was a little shorter, and it's done and you don't have to worry about it. Word, there's going to be 3 weeks in Word. At the end of those 3 weeks, there's the practical exam on Word. So the skills that you're learning this week in lab, you're going to see those again, right? You're going to have to redo that for the practical exam here in 3 or 4 weeks. All right? So that's it. Read, quiz, discussion, and lab. All right? Have a great week, and I will see you online. Oh God, they're at the door.